Project F.A.R.V. was established with a particular goal in mind, and that was to develop technologies based on remote viewing principles. This is the Merkaba, an archetypal shape used for millennia by various religious groups, spiritual practices, and recently by Dr. Stephen Greer in his CE5 meditation techniques. So the first thing you're going to notice here is that the shape has been modified. A traditional Merkaba consists of an upright and inverted three-sided pyramid. Our pyramids have four sides, so they more closely resemble the pyramids at Giza. If it could all be done in the mind alone, by itself, completely all done here, then why would we build temples? Why would we build pyramids? If there is no distance, and all of space and time exists in the mind, then there is no need to physically travel for exploration. The destinations are brought to you. This Merkaba was designed to heighten the fidelity of remote viewing and out-of-body experience techniques through the use of lights, motion, and resonant frequencies. To determine potential technological applications, it first becomes necessary to have a basic understanding of some of the theories that have been posed about why remote viewing works. Theories that may actually have a foundation in quantum mechanics with mathematical justifications. I recently had the opportunity to talk with remote viewing project tasker Courtney Brown, director of the Farsight Institute. In his 2012 presentation to the Society for Scientific Exploration at the University of Colorado, he states, "All that exists in the universe must result from frequencies that coexist in states of superposition. There are no real dimensions. With remote viewing, you're transferring information across infinite distances because there are no distances. There's only constructive and destructive interference processes, nothing else. The wave function of the remote viewer overlaps with the wave functions of everything else. The human brain is a narrowband hologram generator. It is able to select only the frequencies it wants to see. It screens out everything else. Remote viewers are trained to expand the band and be able to see some of the other frequencies that are within their own wave function. That's why remote viewing works." Naturally, after hearing this presentation, I thought these principles, if true, would set a firm foundation for any scientist seeking to develop transporter technology. I was finally able to ask Courtney to elaborate on this point. Well, Courtney, good to meet you.
Yeah, by the way, Fabian, I've been watching your stuff for a long time. It is really great to finally see you face to face.
The real pleasure for me as well. Thank you. Well, I have a question about an old video you did, and this has been on my mind for the last few years because it took me a while to actually understand what you were saying. And it was your video on remote viewing and quantum science, where you touched on Schrodinger's equation, and you kind of changed it around a little bit, and you went on to discuss wave functions and how remote viewing works. In that, you're describing the human mind as being a narrow frequency. I think you said holographic projector or something like that. And then you said that the remote viewer's mind and the way that remote viewing works is that they're able to broaden that narrow band or that perception. Does that sound right?
Yeah, but there's one thing I want to say. You have knocked my socks off and given me the greatest compliment I can remember in as long as time. You actually not only watched that video, but you remembered that I actually adapted Schrodinger's equation to incorporate frequencies to come up with a different way to understand distance. but in terms of
Yes.
the amount of constructive or destructive interference. And I did that presentation at the Society for Scientific Exploration at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And I thought that was really important. And there were a whole bunch of physicists in the audience. Nobody, nobody talked to me about that afterwards. Nobody
Oh,
raised the
wow.
question, and nobody even mentioned it, that the modification, they said, oh, that's cute. Now, I'm a mathematician. I am a formal mathematician. I happen to work in a social science department, but I am a mathematician well known for nonlinear mathematical applications. This is chaos catastrophe theory. So the mathematics, I'm not sort of boasting that I am a mathematician. That is what I do for a living. That's how I pay my rent. So, but I was totally ignored with regard to all of that. It was like talking to a wall. And here you are years later, remembering the details of that presentation and the very fact that I did do a mathematical modification of Schrodinger's equation. I still to this day want to get back to that to explain how this works.
Okay.
And I've never had anybody do that. But yes, that happened.
Wow. I'm asking this because that's the video you did that I was the most wowed by. And what really tipped my attention was when you use this to justify that there is no distance. You put a lot of thought into this. Did you ever consider, outside of remote viewing, did you ever consider using that same principle uh, to consider a machine like a teleportation or portal through space and time that a person can go through to actually be teleported by manipulating those frequencies or functions, those wave functions?
I'm convinced that that's at the heart of ET transportation. These ships that go, because obviously they get here without bothering with the limitations of the speed of light.
Yeah.
So they have to be able to circumvent that whole thing. So the only way to do that is to have a generalization of quantum mechanics. And with a generalization of quantum mechanics, you have to say that what goes on the quantum level also goes on the macro level. So then say, how can that be? So if you have things that appear on the quantum level because of frequencies being in correspondence with each other, then you have to be able to say then big things can appear because frequencies correspond with one another, because we are all made up of those small things. So if you have something that appears on the quantum level at a certain point in time, that thing has a wave function. It has equation. If you have something that's big that happens, it has a wave function. It's an equation. That's true of people. It's true of planets. It's true of solar systems. It's true of galaxies. There's a wave function. So this is a generalization of quantum mechanics. And so basically what it says is that if you have a spaceship and you want to take it from point A to point B, you can either slowly push it with energy to go from point A to point B with a rocket, for example, or you can surround it with a field that will change its frequency, its quantum signature, you might call it, but its overall frequency mix, so that the frequency mix matches the frequency mix that's in that other location. And then, boom, it goes from one spot to the next as soon as the frequencies shift. However, the real problem is tearing things apart. So it's really hard, especially with live things like us, to use it for instant teleportation to go from one spot to the next, because you're likely to tear whatever it is apart. You're changing the the underlying quantum frequencies really rapidly, and like, can you survive that? So you're probably going to want to slide it. Now it'll still be faster than the speed of light, but you're probably going to spend a couple of weeks in the ship going from one star system to the next star system as the frequencies slowly morph from one to the next. However, for a UFO that's flying around in the sky, all you'd see that it's like going blazingly fast and then goes out of existence, meaning you don't see it anymore. It goes off radar, goes off everything, because the frequency generator that surrounds the ship, that changed. As soon as you change it so they're no longer in a frequency that matches the current environment, it's gone. and that matches the physical evidence that we see. So yeah, the teleportation idea is possible, but that instant teleportation idea, the instant teleportation idea may be possible, may not be possible. I personally think there's some hurdles in doing it because you could rip, people are delicate. You could rip things apart, and physical things. I can easily think things going quickly, but instantly, like Star Trek, just instantly materializing from one place to the next. Like technically, it might be possible, but would there be anything left of the person when they got to the other side? It's a really rapid switch. I'm not sure how easy it would be on the person. I'd sort of like to think of Leonard McCoy, the doctor in Star Trek, who was always having the heebie-jeebies of getting into the transporter. He didn't like the idea of having his molecules sort of split up all over the place and instantly materializing someplace else. So I'm sort of thinking he probably was on the right track.
It might be interesting for you, Fabian. I did a talk about a former German physicist who actually also took up this matter of transporting something material into the informational plane. And actually, it can be used for, let's say, instantaneous space travel, but actually it is valid for all transport of information. So it's the same principle for being remote viewing able to work.
Actually, Marcus is raising an interesting idea because the information is considered among physicists. Most of us just think of it as stuff we know, but information is actually considered energy. And E equals mc squared, energy equals mass. So if you're transferring information using remote viewing across time and space, you're transferring energy and mass across time and space. So that really totally violates the basic ideas of classical and even relativistic physics. So there's a lot to wrap your head around with regard to that. But that's been verified in the laboratory setting. So they have done experiments in mainstream that are not in dispute.
Dr. Marcus Perk suggested that I research the late German physicist Burkhard Heim. So I read about Heim's theories and had a marvelous chat with Mark on a theory that seemed to complement Dr. Brown's.
My German remote viewing teacher pointed me to this guy, Burkhard Heim, and I was quite fascinated by theory and bought his books, and it was really hard to understand them because he wrote them between the 1950s and 1980s, and it's an old language, and he created quite a lot of new terms because he worked very isolated. He was heavily crippled due to an accident he had in his youth. So his both arms were torn off, and he was almost deaf and blind completely. And he was a working horse because he had no social life. He didn't know what is weekend or leisure, having a walk. So he was on his chalkboard all the time and writing equations and so on. And wow. So he's, I think, on the level of Hawkins or so, I would guess. And he did quite some interesting things with the theory. And I think this is also a good point to start with. Now I just have to find out how to share it. So this is young Burkhard Heim, I think in his likely mid-20s or so, when he's in front of a chalkboard with quite a lot of equations. And that was actually his life. Yeah, he lived for physics, and the cause for all doing this was his question, why I'm still alive? Because he said, for the universe, it does not make any sense to keep me alive in this physical state if there is not a sense behind it. And so he studied physics, and after he graduated, he moved on to develop a theory, which is what I'm talking about in the next perhaps 30 minutes. So to understand his works, we have to know where he started from. Can you read it? So
Yes, I can see it just fine.
Okay. So he said, well, we have to assume certain standards, for example, the empirical existence of conservative principles. So the energy is not being wasted, it's just transformed. For example, we have the extreme principles like entropy. We have the quantum principle, which means physical effects are always integer multiples of a smallest effect. And we have the interaction fields like electromagnetics, gravitation, and strong and weak force. And of course, we have a kind of, let's say, proof or standard of Einstein's theory of relativity. So based on these basic points he consisted as valid, he formed a unified quantum gravitation theory. And interestingly, he neither needs to have quarks nor confinement. So his theory is valid without quarks and confinement. He does not need them. Also interesting is that throughout his work, he only used 4 constants which he could not derive in a different way. This is the quantum of action, H. What do you call it? Then gamma is the gravitational constant. And here we have 2 constants. It's the vacuum permittivity and the vacuum permeability. And the latter, these 2 are used to calculate the speed of light in vacuum speed, for example. Yeah. So we do not need, well, Hein did not need to have any other constants than these 4. And the rest could be derived from these 4. So, well, he could explain quite a lot. And when he started investigation, he came to a point where he found another constant of nature, and he called this metron. That means it's the smallest possible element in energetical space which can exist. It's not a length, it's not a volume, but it's an area. And why it's an area? Because an area has an orientation, because it's well, yeah, or orientation. So depending on its position, it changes its orientation. Yeah, that makes it different from a length or volume, from a volume, because length and volume is only a scalar. And here you have a vector pointing into a certain direction. So when we use our 4D space-time, where everything we perceive happens in, and we try to permutate all possibilities of these 4-dimensional areas, he came to the requirement that you actually need to have 8 dimensions to have all possibilities displayed of 4-dimensional areas, including the orientation. But only 6 dimensions of these 8 are energetical. So there are 2 dimensions, 7 and 8, which are not energetical, and 6 dimensions which are energetical. And when you set up the parts, we have here our 4D space-time with our 3x3 space matrix, so to speak. Then the 4th element is the time, and here we have the elements 5 and 6, or dimensions 5 and 6, which are, let's say, a bit separated. So these, whatever there is, cannot directly interact with the space itself, but it always have to go via time to interact with the space. And what these 2 additional dimensions are discussed here. So when we have our space in 3 dimensions and we have our time, then we have these 2 additional components. I call it for the rest of the talk X5 and X6. And the X5 components seem to have an influence on the gravity involved. And the element 6 or the dimension 6 represent the wavelengths of the matter components, so to speak. As I said, the smallest element that can exist is an area. So you need at least 2 dimensions to form an area. And if the dimensions 5 and 6 form such a smallest area, these produce the hypothetical gravitons. When you let interact 3 dimensions, namely the dimensions 4 to 6, you get something which moves with the speed of light, and this is related, or this represents photons. So when gravitons interact with time, you got a photonic effect, you got light, so to speak. Now, interestingly, when you add space itself to these new dimensions, for example, you take these 3 space dimensions and you take dimension x5 and x6, you get electrical neutral particles. So when I speak of particles, I always mean elementary particles. Yeah, so the most simple components of matter which can exist in our universe in 3D space. When we take the whole range of 6 dimensions, we get electrical charge particles, for example, like an electron. Also, what is interesting is what is matter? As I said, as a basic assumption, Heim said that the quantum effect is valid. That means there is the smallest one, and there are always multiple integers of it. So whatever is in space cannot be smaller than a certain, let's say, length or area or whatsoever. And therefore, matter is actually a deformed 6-dimensional lattice space, so interacting space. There is nothing solid in this world, only compressed space. And the properties, so that we can weight something, is due to the influence of the gravity components. Because gravity is not only an attractive force, but it's, let's say, rather a principle of order. To show the properties of an elementary particle you observe or you measure, the curvature of space this requires is by the factor 10 raised by 10 higher as observed in astronomical effects. For example, Einstein's theory of relativity was proven when, I think, some physicists used an eclipse and showed that the light of a star was bent along the sun, and its light was visible, although actually the sun was in between. So the light was bent by the sun. And when we deal with elementary particles, the effect is at least by the order 10 raised by 10 higher. Yeah. So it's perhaps even likely in the range of some black holes or whatsoever. Yeah. This is the reason why we can measure particles, so to speak. Based on these findings, he was able to theoretically calculate particle masses, which he let program 1982 at the DAISY. DAISY is a kind of small CERN. Yeah, you know CERN in the Switzerland?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's small brother or whatsoever, how you may call it, at Hamburg. And I think he let run the calculation for 200 or 300 elementary particles. And the deviation between measured and theoretical calculated are very often in the order in the per mil range or lower. So he knew the properties of the sixth dimension and was able to calculate elementary particles on a theoretical base. So this is for me a point where it's shown that Heim could not be totally off regarding what comes later. So what we call matter requires space cells. And as we can see here, the gravity influence or gravity component is valid in all forms of elementary particles Heim calculated. So gravity is really something more as an attracting force. It seems really to be a principle of order. So you can see these 6 dimensions also in a different point of view. The first 3 dimensions, the space dimensions, are interchangeable. For a cube, it does not matter in which direction length, width, and height is. You can switch them. So it does not matter for a cube. But when it comes to the imaginary dimensions, like time, or the x5 or the x6 dimensions, you cannot switch them because they have unique properties. Time, for example, is not a flow, but actually it's an interval, a kind of duration. So it's hours or days or years. The dimension x5 represent the realm of possibilities. So within the dimension x5, there are all possibilities that ever were, are, and will ever be. So it's a kind of ocean of possibilities, so to speak. The dimension 6 represents the realization. So when does something grow, so to speak? If we take here the example of a plant, when you put a seed in the soil, let's say if you put it on wet and rich soil, the plant will grow as you can expect. But also if you put the seed in a dry soil, the possibilities are still there for the plant to grow. It may take a different way for the plant and needs perhaps to adapt to certain circumstances. But nevertheless, the possibilities are there, and the universe looks for a way to let the plant grow. So here we have the realm of possibilities, so to speak. And as this is the degree of organization, that means organization is structured information. And here we are already leaving the pure materialistic view of the world. So the dimensions x5 and x6, although energetical, are not material as such. They only represent possibilities which have an energetical aspect. So, for example, as DNA is a carrier of information and not the information itself, as with the laws of nature. They describe nature, but they are not nature. Yeah. So also, when you talk about, transfer of information, you can also use it, for example, for space travel, because we also seek to travel very fast to reach distant stars, for example. And if you have usual propulsion systems, it would take thousands of years to reach a point. But when you think about the following example, you see that there is a different possibility. Although you can even interchange gravitational and electromagnetic waves in 4D space, you cannot travel faster than speed of light. But there is a second approach. Namely, for example, imagine you have some target point somewhere in space. That it's called the location P1 for position 1, for example. And you have some sensor or some space probe, for example. And you want to transfer it to your position 1. What you need to do is the following. You have to create a bridge between the dimensions 1 to 4 and x5, so that the space probe actually vanishes and is transferred to pure energy, so that the concept of the space probe is represented within the x5 dimension. So you got, let's say, the concept of the space probe, which is existing only in the dimension x5 and has vanished from 4D space. As next, you have to create a kind of image where you want to go to. In this case here, it's a tree. So you have to create at your location where you are an image, a target image, so to speak. And by bringing both images in an overlapping state, Heim calls this the assimilation factor, you actually can create a bridge along which the purely energetical and concept of the space probe can travel along to and later re-enter physical space at the position where you actually wanted to travel. So you can say it's a kind of point-to-point travel via the dimensions x5 and x6. Actually, well, it is said that some UFOs use this kind of travel possibilities. When you see certain video images, you see them really shrink to zero and they are gone. So this seems to be a quite valid explanation how they might travel. So they shift their materialistic components into purely energetical components, still being energetical. Then they create a target image and bring the actual image with the target image in congruence or in an overlapping state. And so this is possible to actually travel to the destination you want to go. And this is actually the same how remote viewing is working regarding not valid or not available information for the remote viewer if he's only using his usual or normal 5 senses, because we can only perceive what we can perceive with our 5 senses, but to get different aspects of a target, let's say even in the future or in the past or in a far distance, the same principle is valid also to perceive these feelings or sensations or perceptions. So actually remote viewing, it's also a kind of transfer of point-to-point transfer of information. And but you cannot do it in 4D space-time, but this requires a 6-dimensional universe where this is possible. So in my opinion, this seems to be a good explanation how it can be done and explained with physical background. Also, interestingly, I've written here, such a method, so a point-to-point transfer, has been proven in the lab and caught on tape. This is pointing to a Chinese Qigong grandmaster, Zheng Boasheng. He was, if you may say so, a guinea pig of the Chinese government, also in the 1990s. And he was famous for his teleportation abilities. So they did experiments in the lab and they filmed it. And on one occasion, he had two boxes where he had one sample he should teleport into another box, and they also put it on weights so that you can see when the weight is changing. And when the lab guys saw that the weight for the box with the object is dropping, they asked him, so it seems to be gone, where is it? And he said, it's completely in my head. Yeah. So there was a transition between the material components of this into a pure energetical concept. It has vanished from space and transformed into a concept. Yeah, that took him about 1 hour to get the transfer done, and another hour to get the object back in the second container. Yeah. So, and in a similar form, I think remote viewing is actually working.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned the video. Is this a video you've seen? Is it anywhere that other people can find it?
No, I've only read it in a book and heard it in an interview. The book is called, I think, Chinese Super Psychics or so from Paul Dong, D-O-N-G. And there are different people mentioned also, this Zheng Boasheng. Yeah.
And I would love it if you could you type out his name so I can do a Google search for him?
Yeah, I can do it later.
Okay.
So after the session.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I think if the PDF of this book is not too large, I also can send it to you.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome. So this here is rather, let's say, the idea of how information can be transferred from one point to another, regardless of their spatially and timely distance. Because time is not valid, or it's not the same in the dimensions x5 and x6, because if I go back, for example, time is rather influencing the interval of something to exist. It's not a flow of time, but rather how long elementary particles can exist. That means in this pool of possibilities or ocean of possibilities, if we are in one position, we can travel, so to speak, to any place and any time in every existence, because we are not moving through time, but we are choosing and picking the right possibilities we want to have and let them become real. Yeah. So I always wondered why people tell about they are traveling also sideways in time and not forwards and backwards, because everything that is in this, let's say, area spanned up by the vectors of the fifth and sixth dimensions, and time only picks up what it's required to pick up. Therefore, you can travel along certain paths to let materialize certain aspects. For example, if you remote view and you see the color red, or you feel the texture of an object, yes, so you are looking for an aspect, and your intuition or your subconsciousness leads you to the point where the aspect you are looking for comes in overlapping with the aspect there is of the target, and therefore you can experience the sensation. Okay, so beyond the dimensions 1 to 6, Heim later developed 6 additional dimensions in cooperation with a Viennese physicist, Walter Drescher. I only briefly mention them because Walter Drescher is still active today, and he steps back from this idea of dimensions 7 to 12. But for the sake of completeness, I will give a brief introduction to them. So, as I said, the dimensions 1 to 6 represent energetical aspects, and to have all possible permutations of a 4-dimensional hypercube with all orientations, you require 8 dimensions. And the dimensions 7 and 8 would represent a kind of information space, which can be compared with kind of blueprints of an elementary particle, blueprints of an atom, blueprints of a molecule, blueprints of a human being. So it's, of course, only a comparison and not literally. Here you have only possibilities and amplitudes of them, physically speaking. But they give their information to the realm of possibilities, so as an input, as blueprint. So what do you have to do, or what do you require to be able to form, let's say, a human heart? Yeah, and they are in constant exchange. One important aspect is, as I said, the smallest, which can be the so-called matron in existence, the smallest element has the same size in the lower 6 dimensions. But the element for the information space has a different size. And that means if you try to project something of a different size into something which does not quite fit, you get an uncertainty. And this might be the explanation why there is a so-called Heisenberg uncertainty. You know it? Or have you heard of it?
I would love it if you would. I've heard of it, but I'd love it if you would define it.
That means when you try to measure a particle, an elementary particle like an electron, for example, you can either determine its velocity or its position, but not both at the same time. That means it's the uncertainty principle, for example. And this is also a very important aspect in quantum physics. Yeah, and so if you try to map something down on something which has not the same dimensional extensions, so to speak, because they have the same, because they have a different lattice length, you get, well, this uncertainty. And that is the reason why quantum physics may exist at all, and why we have this realm of possibilities which can exist. Also interestingly is, before something becomes, well, manifest or real in our 4D space-time, we have 2 different fields of information projected down. One is from the informational space, where the information are projected down into our 4D space-time, and of the 4-dimensional space itself. So we have 2 entangled fields of the information space and the physical space, and only when it goes through the bottleneck of time, the possibilities collapse. Yeah, so this is a good explanation for the so-called double slit experiment. I think you know, yeah?
Yes.
So it's not the observer which is the crucial part, but it's the excuse me, it's the involved time interval, in my opinion. So when you count something, when an elementary particle is going through and you look very closely, then it got captured by time, so to speak. It does not matter if someone observes, but it triggers the time of existence for the elementary particles. Yeah. Therefore, I mentioned here time is not a flow, but a duration. How long does something last? Yeah. So if you do not look at the moon, does it still exist or not? Yes, it does. But it has nothing to do with the observation, but with the involved time interval. And if you see, oh, sorry, I forgot. Here we have the upper 4 dimensions. Heim could not say very much about them because he could only approach them with set theory, and he could show that they could not directly interact with the informational space, so they need to use a small bypass. And when you take these dimensions here, you come to a 12-dimensional universe, so to speak. But to transfer the information from the dimensions 9 to 12 down, it needs a bypass via a so-called mediator space. And he said this space is at least 26 or 28 dimensions. So there is, purely mathematically seen, something larger involved, but this is not per se required to build a universe as we know it, but there may be something more behind it. Okay. As I said, in these dimensions 9 to 12, which I'm called God only knows, you could only deal with numbers, with set theory. And there are also some remarkable results. For example, when you only deal with numbers, you have only concepts. You have nothing energetical. Here, Heim came to a point where he said, well, we have something in physics which is called Sommerfeld's constant. It's called alpha. And it's dimensionless, and it regulates the strength of the electromagnetic interaction between elementary charged particles, something quite fundamental. And here it's a screenshot from Wikipedia. So you have here electron charge, you have here the action, quantum of action, you have here vacuum resistivity. So the units cancel out, that in the end you have only a pure number, but you still have some dimensions going into the equation. When Heim calculated his formulas for the charge of the electron, he came to a relation which he used, where in the end this Sommerfeld constant is only a function of pi. So pi is responsible for the characterization of the strength of electromagnetic interaction between elementary charged particles. And this is something quite amazing, because a concept of a circle in our dimension is responsible for the electromagnetic interaction between elementary charged particles. Yeah, that I think would leave many scientists quite speechless. And also more interesting is that Edward Riordan did a pi session and made some videos about it. And what he described was also quite amazing, because he got also electromagnetic interactions, and he got a consciousness behind the curtain which is separated from us. And when you compare this with Heim theory, quite a few similarities appear, and, well, lets you keep thinking about the nature of the universe, so how it is really set up and made. The age of the universe. Well, when when we again look at the so-called metrons, the smallest in existence, I'm asking myself, well, it's very small. So the length of such an area is about the Planck length. So I think 10 raised by minus 44 or something like this. So it's very small. And the whole 3D space is filled with these small areas. And he asked, well, if the quantum principle is valid throughout time, so there is the smallest one and there are multiple integers of it, when was there only one metron? And he calculated till the start of all, and he said, well, in the very beginning, before time, there were 3 spheres. He called it a sphere trinity, each consisting of one area or a sphere called metron, and they had a diameter of about 90 centimeters to, I think, 3 meters. So roughly in this area. And they were concentric, they were bubbles, and they were outside of space-time. Actually outside of time. Then something happened and shifted them into time. And at this point, the spheres grow and divided into half. So at the next step, instead of 3 spheres within each other, you had 3 half spheres which had grown in size. And over the span of incredible 10 raised by 99 years, there was nothing but empty space where the number of these metrons increased, but their size grew smaller. And around 15 to 40 billion years ago, something happened, which disturbed the metrons, compressed them, and they needed to rapidly expand because otherwise they could not contain the energy which was projected down from the dimensions 9 to 12. And they used a loophole in nature where the cells suddenly could increase in speed, drastically increase in speed over their usually boundaries for a short period of time. And this happened not only, let's say, in one location, but throughout the whole universe. And therefore we have a universe where a large amount of so-called Big Bangs did happen. And Big Bang means that due to the interaction of the 6-dimensional space cells, where they were compressed and torn apart and so on, matter came into existence. So it seems, or it might be, that we have a huge amount of so-called optical universes where something which we call matter is existing. And what we can see today is a so-called Hubble radius, and this is about a radius of 10 raised by 26 meters. But according to Heim, the size or the diameter of the actual universe is by a factor of 10 raised by 99 larger. So this is an incredible amount of space, which the real universe is larger than what we can perceive. Next thing, as I said, the universe needed to extend to be able to keep the down projected energy within these metrons. And therefore, at the time now, we have already reached about 33% of a maximum expansion of the universe. But regarding time, only 0.62% of the available time to reach a maximum expansion have been used up. So we have here a large discrepancy. Yeah, and therefore we have an extending universe, yes, but at a very slow rate because we still haven't yet spent 1% of available time to reach a maximum expansion of the whole universe. Yeah, so we really have much time left. This is half time. So after the universe reaches its maximum expansion, where the size of these metrons decrease and gets smaller and smaller and smaller, then everything goes back. So the universe in size decreases, and the size and the area of the metron increases again. And well, as I said before, we only had spent 0.2% of the time to reach maximum expansion, so we only have used 1.3% of the maximum available time the universe does exist. Another interesting point is the constant of nature do not change with time, but they all depend on the size of the metron. Yeah, because Heim did a complete meteorization of the universe. So time is not the influencing factor of the constants of nature, but it's the size of the metron, actually. Well, next part is consciousness.
And actually, if I could pause you real quick,
yeah.
Has anything been mentioned as to what determines or causes the size of the metron to change?
That's a good question.
Okay. And if it's an unknown, that's fine. I was just curious if...
Yeah. I have to reread the books. I can't tell you right now.
Okay, well, we can move right along.
But as I said, they shrink in size, but they multiply. And that was also something Edward got in his Pi sessions. So the, let's say, life aspects, where you have where the cells multiply and so on. That was also quite interesting. So this was quite physical based and materialistic and spacely, so to speak. So the consciousness part also comes into play. Also here, Heim used the dimension X5 to get a bridge between materialism and consciousness. And he could do this by using not a yes-no logic, so it's called anthropomorphic logic, but an aspect-related logic, where you not exclude something, but keep the whole, amount of data available and use them in a certain logic. I have to admit, I started to reading this work too. It's also 300 or 400 pages, and I really got headaches when I read it. So I can't tell for myself that I understood it. No, I only can repeat what others had written about it.
I gotcha.
So it's a way to show how information is transported within materialistic systems, and that information as such is something on its own and does not require energy or matter. So he was thinking about, well, what is consciousness and how is information exchanged between different parts? And he said, well, I found out that there are certain degrees of consciousness which are related to this factor lambda. So within every system, you have a certain amount of channels where so-called activity streams are running up or running down. And by activity, it means information, a transport of information. So at the very basic level, when you have lambda equals 0 and 2 raised by 0 means you have one channel. So on the most elementary biological elements there are in existence are so-called biospheres. And you have no connections because they only can run up or down, and they have no neighbors, so they have no connections.
So similar to a base of binary in terms of information.
So to speak, yes.
Okay.
So the next higher level of consciousness would be regarding where you put the flora, so flowers, for example, into. You have two channels, and you have one connecting bridge via information can be exchanged. The next level are simple animals. So you have 4 channels, and you have 6 connection bridges, so to speak, between information can be exchanged. The next higher are primates, like orang-utans, for example. They have 8 channels and already 28 bridges or connections. When it comes to humans, they have 16 channels and 120 connections, so to speak. So this is quite an increase in the number of connections. He was asked, what about the so-called enlightened one? And he'd say, well, a being with 32 channels would be no match, or an enlightened one, we call enlightened one, would be no match compared to a being with lambda equals 5. It would be so beyond what we can imagine. He could not describe it. So when we have here a system where information is moved along in an ordered way, we can also find out that there may be different levels which you can the activity attribute to. So we have here again the dimension x5, and we have here a kind of graphical representation of the activity streams in different areas. And when I have to start a little bit different. So Heim did what he called a quadruple contouring of the world. So the dimension x5 governs different aspects of reality. So in the area here, he called soma or matter, this realm is governed by pure physical laws. And here you have, for example, activity streams with information raising up or down. The next thing, or the next level, is the so-called bias or living matter. So here you already leave the pure physical aspects, and you come to aspects which cannot be described by purely physical law, but which are still governed regarding their degree of organization. The next thing, or the next level, is the so-called psyche. This is the realm of the mental, when you perceive things, when you experience things, for example. And on top of it, you have the area Heim calls persona. It is the encapsulating all of an idea, for example, of a human being. So here we are in the realm of wisdom and intuition. And he said that whatever comes down from the realm of wisdom and intuition governs the realm of the mental, which governs the realm of the living matter, and which has influence or impact on the matter aspect. So by describing this chain of action, so to speak, he had an explanation for psychosomatic illnesses, because whenever something forms wrong, let's say, it first comes in here in the wisdom or intuition part, forms in the mental part, and later may turn out in something which affects the biological body. You know? Of course, information goes always both ways, up and down, but the impact is stronger when it comes from above and acts on something below. Interestingly, remote viewing is dealing in the same way, so to speak, because we have some information coming in from somewhere, what may cause an emotion or a physical reaction first in the head, which is then transferred into a physical sensation. Yeah, so this is here a very good agreement between how both systems work, because it's actually the same system. Yeah. And when Heim developed this approach, he did not work yet on the dimensions 6 to 12. He said there is still some research open, but this part, this wisdom and intuition part, rather goes into the informational plane with the dimensions 7 to 8. Yeah. So we are here already outside of any energetical aspects, but rather we are dealing just with concepts or blueprints, so to speak, which are only later turned into energetical aspects when they are dealing with the X6 and X5 dimensions. And also, he says, these ideas which are handled and transferred and are not related to something physical. They have an existence on their own. So what are some, implications on what I just said? For example, if we take the Tanner Dam project, which is a famous remote viewing project, where the concept of a dam should represent the results of a forecast for a stock prediction. The remote viewers described the dam in all their aspects, and they had no clue that it was just a concept. And by dealing with the aspects of these conceptual impressions, they shifted these impressions higher and gave them, so to speak, reality. They made them actually real. So this is, well, what I termed here imagined entities. By thinking about something, you bring it or drag it into reality. And when you do it with many people, the influence can be, of course, more drastic. So when you are, let's say, if you have a large crowd of people and, for example, praying to an entity, this entity is really shifted high into the X5 realm, and the higher it gets, the higher is the impact on our 4D reality. So, for example, if you have a large crowd of people praying to a saint, for example, and suddenly a miracle, a healing appears, you can explain it by this way, that the consciousness of the people raise the level of whatever they are praying to, and this has a larger impact on reality as a single person alone could do. Yeah. So all so-called psi phenomena are actually gravitons turning into something materialistic when it comes in our 4D space. So the gravitons are the cause for all psi phenomena, so to speak, because they change the state of something. And that can happen outside of space-time. So even drastic changes can happen within an instant of time, because time is not the same in the dimensions x5, x6, x6 as we perceive it here on our 4D space-time. If you have your, let's say, funny graphical representation along the x5 dimensions, if you take it here as a half sphere, you have here on the lower level, the consciousness creatures, Then above, you have the area of bodily existences and residuals. So this may be karmic aspects, so to speak. So our soul, for example, is still existing, but in a shifted space, so to speak. I will show you one slide later.
Okay. Before we move on to that next slide, so this is slide 14 here?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question that compares this slide to an earlier slide. This slide where you were discussing how things may change or how teleportation may happen. I'll tell you when you get to it. There.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first image here where you discussed that you could create an image or a visualization of the destined target.
Yeah.
That first one. I'm comparing the philosophy behind that image with what you just described in slide 14.
Yeah.
So my question would be, and I want to ask this the correct way, the question would be, how do you create the target image here that you want to then find and then know that it is a real space-time position rather than something that has been created in slide 14 by, say, a group of people?
This is an excellent question.
Thank you. Hey, this has been such an excellent presentation. I have very few questions because it all makes a lot of sense. But this is the question that I have at this point.
Unfortunately, where I got this from, it's not explained in detail. It's only said you have to create an image and move that image into the and lift it higher within the X5 dimension. It's unfortunately not said how you create such an image, because Hein was rather interested in how can you transform a space probe into pure concept. And although he was a good constructor and did quite a few machines by himself, he could not build a working machine which could, well, for example, get an image of the target and lift it higher within the X5 dimension. So it's only theoretically described and not yet in practice.
Okay.
So that would also make a good remote viewing project, I guess.
Well, my first thought is I see how he would not be able to build such a machine because ultimately what I think also is happening within remote viewing is that you're accessing the basic files or information, so to speak, from the higher dimensions rather than actually accessing real places necessarily. Right. So say the distance between you and me. You're in Germany, I'm in America. Mm-hmm. These are both real places. However, the information for both of those places would be stored in a higher plane. So that would then be the connecting situation. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we actually have a projection of information from the dimensions X5 and X6 down into our 4D space-time.
Yes.
So every information that was ever available is within these two dimensions, 5 and 6. So it's only a mapping of information into our 4D plane, so to speak.
Okay, and this would explain why remote viewing results can often be off. Where a person could connect with a target, they can connect properly with the ideal target, but due to the probabilities of time, their conclusions could be correct or incorrect, is what I'm seeing.
Yeah, the thing is, between our soul, so to speak, has a personality on its own. It's a complete own being we usually do not get to know. And if it sees something that it's quite attracting and says, well, okay, here dummy meat, I describe some aspects of the target for you. But for me, this aspect quite next to the target is also interesting. Well, I might give you also some aspects from this.
Yes.
So therefore, you have to get to know yourself very good to know your favorites or your no-goes, so to speak, of your subconsciousness. Well, actually, it's the overconsciousness, and we are the sub. And then displacement might be reduced, or at least that you could feel when you get distracted. For example, if you have temporal or emotional attractors. Yeah.
Excellent description. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, I think that answers my question there. I think I'm ready to move on.
Perfect. Because here we are already, well, okay, finally come to the last slide, because he wanted to know, well, what happens when I'm dying? Is there something which resides, which remains? And he says, well, death is definitely not a simple extension, but well, it's a kind of backup which is shifted into higher dimensions. So when we start to die, the part from the matter and the part from the biology, so the blue and the green, starts to fade away over time. And what we have perceived in the plane of the psyche and the mental, this information is shifted up into the realm of the wisdom and intuition. And this is, well, a kind of backup, so to speak. So this is actually your life passing by. Yeah, when you see the movie, this is the emergency backup of the information that in the case that your physical body diseases and disintegrates, that the information can be stored, and therefore it's shifted into the realm of the pure information. Yeah. Therefore, the personality completely remains intact. You are completely aware of your surroundings, but you are simply shifted in a parallel X5 level, so to speak. Yeah. If you have any residuals, in brackets, karma, for example, this may delay your transition because you have to work them off. But nevertheless, it's then possible to raise higher in this X5 dimensions or also in the informational space. And as you raise higher in the X5 plane, it's also possible to have an influence on the lower plane, although you are not physically connected to them. But we know from, for example, ghosts and other similar experiences that they may have an impact on the physical plane. Also, quite the opposite is also valid. So when a human life starts to be created, or starts to come into existence, the personality part, which is here in the informational space, is looking for an acceptable later host, and glides his finger down and is feeling, is this right for me to spend the one life with this physical aspects here in this world? So he says this process to lock the personality with the biological components, this happens after 3 months. After, I don't know the term. So when the baby is 3 months old. Yeah. So before, it has not yet a personality of its own. But from approximately 3 months onwards, the still to be born baby has already a personality. The lifespan of such a personality core or a soul is very long. So he says multiple of lifetimes, but he did not give an exact number. But he says it's very long. And as I said before, thoughts or ideas have their self-existence, so they do not depend on materialistic components, but within the realm of the informational space, they do self-exist. So this is a brief overview of the Heim theory. And well, one last word. Heim was asked, can there be a TOE, so theory of everything? And he said, well, with today's means and possibilities of mathematics, there cannot be, because mathematics is a yes-no logic. But you need to have a different logic to explain aspects beyond the materialistic view we have. Yeah, and therefore, he created his so-called synchrometry, an aspect-related logic. So it will be the work for future generations to work on new logics with which they perhaps can describe more than of what we are yet still able to describe. And this will give quite new insights into how the universe is working. So that's it from my point of view.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Actually, would you mind stop sharing the slideshow so we can see each other here?
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. What a fantastic presentation. I loved it. I think it was all very straightforward. It all made a lot of sense. And thank you for asking my questions right in the middle.
Yeah. You're welcome. So I'm here for answering your questions. And, well, you really seem to understand quite a lot because you only had 2 or 3 questions.
Right. It all made a lot of sense. I have read over Burkhard Heim's work, which it made very good sense, even though it's a new concept for me. I had not heard of those particular higher dimensions because I had previously followed string theory, as well as I'm now studying the electric universe, which says some very different things with a very different base where there is no reliance on gravitation or several of the other highly accepted physics principles. But this theory, even going outside of the talk of gravitation and dimensions, makes a lot of sense to me. It's a very interesting concept, and thank you for you really seem to have put great bullet points on everything that I read over that Heim was saying. So it was very easy to understand, even if you have a very basic sense of physics. So that was very, very good. And then it even went on beyond the general physics that everybody's comfortable talking about and into those higher realms of what many would term spiritual or esoteric. So thank you for putting that all together.
You're welcome. So for me, it helped to understand why remote viewing is working, because everything we perceived and how information come to a viewer can be well explained with a theory. But I have to admit that it's still a theory, and most people have a very split opinion about this, about Heim, because one part says, well, he must be right, it's absolutely fabulous, and the other part says it's absolutely rubbish. Also here, one point is when Heim published his work, he did not do peer reviews of articles in his past, but he published all in one, so to speak, and not even in a scientific environment, but at a friend, and his friend was a churchman, nevertheless a professor. So when a crippled physicist publishes his work, at Churchman, so to speak, and he also talks about non-materialistic aspects of physics which involve consciousness. Well, this can be quite frightening for some physical-oriented people who only believe in materialism.
Yes, and at some point, I think the scientific and the physics community in particular, science has ignored the nature and the definition of consciousness forever. It's never really been acknowledged. So at some point, yes, we can describe the physical world we live in, which is wonderful. But at some point, it would be good for a well-known and respected physicist to say, this is what we think consciousness is. And that hasn't really been done yet. So I think I commend scientists like Burkhard Heim who do make an attempt to acknowledge how consciousness fits into this entire equation, because that's where physics and science and religion tend to really part ways. They favor one or another very heavily.
Yeah. I'm also reading right now Ingo Swan's latest book, Mysteries of the Gods, I think it's called. And there Ingo mentions so that in the, I think, early 1900s, the age of reason really fully struck, and what was before still intuitive was demolished and wiped out from society, and after that only pure reason, logic, and materialism was encouraged. And he also says, we as Westerners, so to speak, we are looking first into the details and try to make up what it's about and how the whole is working, while the people from the East just think the opposite way. They rather see the all and then coming slowly down to the details. Yeah, and so this is also where we can still learn from each other, because that will also certainly switch our thinking and gives new insights if we would be able to merge both aspects.
Yes, and I think that's very important. I think that's what is needing to come in the future here, a holistic approach to our understanding of the world that we live in. Because when I think about it, it does make sense that a scientist wants to start at the base level, the bottom, what they want to study, what they can physically touch and measure with instruments. And so that is a good base to start with if you want to call yourself a scientist of the physical world. It just makes sense. And then what it can't touch would be, say, a different sort of science. Metaphysics can do this, but a discussion on psychology and sociology, those are completely non-physical things, but should still be brought into the equation at some point. So it is important to have a base level of physical sciences and non-physical sciences. And when the two marry, that's when I think we'll really make some great breakthroughs. And so this presentation here, and it's a huge topic for one scientist to try to tackle, which Burkhard Heim, I have to take my hat off to him and everyone he worked with and anybody who has theories that are similar. Where even if they're not correct, they are at least attempting to study a connection between the physical and the non-physical and the conscious. So it's huge. And I believe Einstein also began to study some of the consciousness aspects in the very latter part of his life. And a lot of people like to step back and go, oh, no, that can't be tested. We can't have there is no mathematical theory for sadness or joy. I mean, you can't easily create the mathematical terms for that, so it cannot be measured, therefore it is not scientific. And yet, it's a realm that there's so much room left for research. And I know that there are these scientific studies that have been done on the brain where they'll put in electrodes and try to measure the chemical chemoelectric interactions that are happening in the brain that might be tied to happiness and sadness, depression, all these things. And of course, you can make medications out of that. And then there's money. And so I think that is the realm where the study will continue. What we're talking about in terms of physics and metaphysics. People, when there's money, you look at the pharmacies, and they're all about this research. But when you look at, say, people that are in the physical sciences that dealing with space, they are afraid to go anywhere near what the pharmacists would touch on. The pharmacists make a lot of money from creating chemicals that will address these things, whereas physicists, particularly astrophysicists, and anybody interested in traveling in space or even traveling faster here on Earth, they could benefit from these kinds of scientific theories and overlap as well.
Likely they already do. In 1979, Heim's friend, Mr. Illubrand von Ludwiger, former president of the European section of MUFON, came over to a talk, or rather a conference. I think it was a Rockefeller conference, 1979, where also Hall Puthoff was participating, and they were discussing UFO matters from a scientific point of view. And there, Mr. von Ludwiger gave a presentation to Hall Puthoff, John Alexander, Dean Radin, John or Bob Bigelow. I think Bob Bigelow is also a rocket man. So, and as Nick Cook was saying on the Erva talk, after that conference, he noticed an increased activity in, propulsion systems for space and rocket vehicles. Yeah. So I think the coincidence is too large to be just coincidence. So I think that Mr. von Ludwiger could give some interesting input to this gentleman, which may have pushed this topic, and that we perhaps already are capable of increasing with, capable of traveling with quite high speeds. If faster than light, I don't know. I think that the point-to-point transfer, as I mentioned, hard to say if it's already been done or created, but personally, I don't think so.
I see.
Not by us.
Okay. And I do want to say thank you for, in your presentation, you did also present the higher dimensions that Burkhard Heim mentioned. You said that right now, I believe, we're focused on the dimensions 1 through 6. And these days, they kind of want to work away from dimensions 7 through 12. So thank you, first of all, for including all of that so that this presentation is with complete information of what Burkhard Heim wanted to present. But I wanted to ask, why is it that people are moving away from the 7 through 12?
Well, actually, it's Heim's co-author, Walter Dröscher. He has teamed up with a German professor, Jochen Heuser, and they are working what they call extended Heim theory. It has nothing to do with Heim theory as such, only with certain aspects of his work. And they are using a 4-dimensional dual space. Well, I have to admit, I do not understand anything more about it, but it's reduced to 4 dimensions. And Mr. Heuser says there cannot be more dimensions because otherwise we would measure things differently. So, and Mr. Dröscher also wanted to calculate additional particle masses, which Heim was not yet able to do. So he wants to go on the more heavy particle masses, and therefore he was looking for a new or different approach, which Heim's approach could not provide. So what's true about this, I can't tell. Yeah. But what I've nevertheless found interesting is that when he was dealing with the dimensions 9 to 12, and where he could only use set theory to get some results from, that he could theoretically calculate the four known interaction coupling constants, which one is this so-called Sommerfeld constant. And he said, besides these four known constants, there must be 6 additional ones, 2 which are regarding the same transformative aspect, and 4 others, I don't know what they were describing, but that there must be at least 6 additional ones for all aspects we can see and perceive, and some of these we may not have yet discovered.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask that question, and the part of the answer that I guess I really latched onto, that I liked and I do appreciate, is when the discussion of there being too many dimensions, and him saying that if we measured in more than 4 dimensions, we would have to change the nature in which we measure things. Is that pretty much what you were saying there?
Kind of, yeah.
Yes, I have some thoughts on that as well that I probably don't have time to go into for the video that we're recording now, but that the concept that people, the discussion of dimensions in and of itself, that word dimensions has a flaw that limits the way people think and causes people to think incorrectly about the nature of the world that we live in. So I have my own thoughts on that, things that I've discussed with my older brother, who is also deeply into physics, particularly electric universe theories. That the idea, when people discuss dimensions, they are just hurting themselves. You look at string theory, where I think at one point they were discussing 27 different dimensions, when ultimately we don't live in a dimension. We can describe dimensionality and measurements, but we don't live in those measurements. And the thought that we live in measurements hurts a lot of people. I mean, the terminology there causes misthought. So that's a discussion, a whole nother additional discussion. I'm happy that you, so I like to acknowledge what Burkhard Heim was saying while not limiting it to dimensional talk, because if it comes out that terminology causes confusion, I wouldn't want the theories that use that language to be thrown out. Because I think there's a lot to be said for what Burkhard Heim said. Particularly, the way I describe a lot of things is in terms of computer science. Because a computer, you can often compare real physiological characteristics of the universe. You can compare those to the virtual characteristics that are created within a computer. The information systems of a computer might be comparable to what Burkhard Heim discussed in his dimensions 5, 6, and up. There's a comparison that can easily be made and shown. I might even make a computer model of that to compare. Thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time to go over and give me this full presentation. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I'm lucky that you are such a good and understanding listener.
Oh, I try.